Welcome to Bat Therapy, mental health through the lens of comics and film. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness.
We're your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Emilia Brown and educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and social media and find our Patreon at patreon.com/battherapy.
This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources. So our psychology spotlight this time around, I was trying to think of something that works really well with our guest, Dr. Michael Sharippa. And so obviously as a forensic psychiatrist, what we were talking about with Arkham and other forensic psychiatrists in Gotham and also his book, Arkham Asylum is just a big topic that came up. So I was thinking it would be good to revisit something that, gosh, I think the last time we talked about Arkham in depth was it our first episode?
Is he the first or second?
Yeah, Arkham Asylum. That was one of our first episodes. I'm not sure if we've come back to it since then. And I'm a little afraid to go back to it. But
I feel
we
like
were rusty.
so it's funny because I feel like with Arkham Asylum, we never really left because we're always talking about
we're always talking about it.
All the villains end up there. And so we never really
Yeah, all the villains end up there. Isn't that interesting? Okay, so here's what I want the spotlight to be about today is what was Arkham Asylum supposed to be? And with that, just talking about, okay, so what exactly is this whole, I mean, that was obviously, it's more of a forensic, more of a legal focus, but just generally speaking, what are these places and spaces that are within a hospital or a long-term inpatient setting? Like, what is it supposed to be? Because obviously Arkham did not end up like that, right? So last week we were talking about how the Joker, he doesn't belong there. He does not, in fact, have a mental health condition that is needing treatment. So yeah, all the villains seem to end up at Arkham, and that's not what Arkham is supposed to be.
Right.
So yeah, I figured it'd be interesting to just talk about that a little bit.
So I guess like thinking about which, like, I can't remember if we did this already or not. Like, we talk about like which Batman villains should actually be in Arkham?
So last week, so some renditions of the Riddler might belong there, others might not, just depending on which one, right? Because some of them are actually a little more Joker-esque in terms of their empathy level.
Two-Face probably there.
Two-Face is probably there. Harley Quinn could potentially be there. A lot of Poison Ivy stuff.
Ventriloquist,
absolutely. And so there's a lot of folks that actually make sense to be there. And so in Batman the Animated Series, I would argue that a lot of times they show people who would appropriately be in a place like Arkham Asylum to get treatment and help.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I feel like I remember there was one time where, and I can't remember if it was a comic or a show. I hate that I don't remember where it was, but Bane was in like a separate part in like a substance abuse area because of the venom. I always thought that was really interesting. I'm like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's exactly where he should be because he's an addict. Then
so there are mental health courts. There's a lot of times where treatment might be worked into what is decided within the criminal system. So hey, you can go the jail prison route, or here's the treatment route. There are other times where a person might not be competent to stand trial, or there might be times where a person is deemed they essentially were not able to be in reality enough to be fully aware of the crime that they were committing. There are all these different ways that a person might end up more in a treatment oriented way. Here's the crux of it though. So Arkham Asylum, asylums actually, I mean now asylum is it's a cringy word. When we think
Right.
asylum, we don't think of something good.
Right.
Back in the day, theoretically, it was meant to be a place where people could go who had mental health struggles and help them be able to function as well as possible, and almost
Hmm.
essentially this communal living space or campus. There were campuses. Things went awry a lot. And so by no means am I claiming that these places were perfect. There's a lot of experimentation that happened. A lot of lobotomies, for example, is one of the ones I think a lot of people know about.
Hmm.
A lot of women who were too much trouble for their husbands that were sent to places where their husbands didn't have to deal with them anymore. A lot of things happened. And so when especially medications like the antipsychotics started coming around, there were finally these ways where we said, "Oh wow, okay, we can do more than maintaining. There might be cures here. There's this biological context that we can hit on and treat."
Hmm.
And so places like Arkham Asylum actually like the representations that they show, there's like they kind of highlight some of the dirty history of a lot of the things that have gone on in the health mental health care system,
Hmm.
unfortunately. uh and on the flip side, it'd be nice to see them do an updated version of Arkham Asylum. uh
Like
they do.
how it should be.
I mean, they do have some renditions where you see some legitimate treatment happening, or I don't know, I just one of the things that they often lack is the screening process, because
Yeah.
people like the Joker inevitably end up coming in. And
Yeah.
so that I feel like is the flaw that seems to be most consistent across the storylines.
Hmm. I I feel like every time it comes around, the source the source of the problem is Hugo Strange.
Ah, yeah.
I,
Oof.
I feel like he's the source of the problem most of the time, and the issue there too is you look at the reality of it, and it still ends up a lot of times being about money. Like, oh, I'm going to do this experiment and I get famous for it, or I'm going to interview this person and everyone's going to look and I'm going to get famous for it. And
Mm.
part of me
So yeah,
thinks
there's a
about,
fame piece for him. Yeah.
yeah, and part of me thinks about like, oh wow, how real is that? How much does that reflect in modern society? Like whenever, like especially looking at all the true crime documentaries there are
Mm.
now, and all the infatuation with serial killers and all this stuff. Like I feel like there's a part of that that's reflective of how it could be. Like if Hannibal Lecter were real, he'd be a very famous person. Like he would, and
And so that's the thing is fame and money, absolutely those get in the way. And the money piece in particular, I think, is really a crux in the system we have. So
mhm,
when antipsychotics came out, so here's just one example. So when antipsychotics came out, there's actually, okay, so people listening, you probably like podcasts because you're listening. NPR
hope
has
so.
yeah, exactly. NPR has a really good podcast. It's called Lost Patients. I forget how, I think it's like 7 or 8 episodes, and they focus in on Seattle and they look at all these different parts of the mental health crisis, and essentially how people that have more severe and persistent mental illness, how they can struggle given the setup of our system. And it talks about the history of the system. There's a lot of really great stuff there.
Mhm,
And one of the things that it zooms in on is the fact that, so when antipsychotics came out, there there was a different setup they could have with these treatment places. But what do the people who inevitably are running these places, give money to these places, the politicians even, they're looking at money. They're looking at, okay, how much bang for our buck are we getting, this, that, and the other. And so, unfortunately, sometimes the numbers don't give you the full picture. Numbers in and of themselves, just because you get data doesn't mean it's all of the data and doesn't mean it's the full story.
mhm,
And so there was all this pressure And arguably something really good that happened was also the fact that we were saying, "Hey, should we really be locking people up like this?" And there was a fight to essentially deinstitutionalize. So less places that are asylums, and
Hmm.
let's not put people away and forget about them.
Right.
What happens? Kind of honestly the opposite of what happens in Gotham. So Gotham, everyone ends up at Arkham Asylum. In the real world, everyone's ending up at Blackgate. So in the real world, Two-Face, ventriloquist, all these people end up in Blackgate
Hmm.
because unfortunately, we didn't have the other treatment options in place. They didn't put
Right.
money in different places. They just took all the money away. And then you're left with nothing. And so everyone's ending up in the legal system and ending up in the prisons. So arguably, I mean, maybe it's better if you send too many people to Arkham than sending people that need Arkham over to prison, but either way, it's unfortunately not a perfect system.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think it's such an interesting situation in Gotham, just because it's like these are always wild, wild, unthinkable situations, and
Mm,
Batman's dragging them into the police station in the
yeah.
Batmobile after catching them and driving off, and it's like, well, what do we do with this person? Do we put them in Gen Pop in, or do we put them in a holding cell of, like, obviously solitary confinement? And there's a part of me that always has wondered, like, because I know that there are like prison hospitals
Yeah.
out there. Like, I know that that is a term. Like, there's a prison hospitals, and there's a part of me that's like, man, I'm surprised that Blackgate and Arkham haven't pretty much just been like a side by side facility, almost like Arkham is a wing of Blackgate, where,
Well,
because I mean, because like you said, there's a lot of them over there that need mental health treatment.
and so prisons theoretically also have mental health treatment within them that they offer because there's also a difference between I am a person who committed a crime. And I have mental health
Hmm.
difficulties and they impacted something about it versus this crime in large part is due to
Right.
the mental health condition or the mental health condition is preventing me from being able to actually know what's going on, for example, within the legal system, right? So there are times where the mental health is just so much at the forefront. This is one of those times where I like to pause and remind everyone mental health conditions do not equal being more likely to be violent. You're more likely to be the victim of violence. So, this is a very small portion of people that have these
Right.
conditions that end up being violent, and it's related to the mental health diagnosis that they have.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so the problem in general though is there's not enough money and there's not enough resources. There's not enough people doing the work, and to be frank, there's not enough training in it either. So I okay. The field I'm in is severe and persistent mental illness. We focus on things like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder. We also focus on disability related to a variety of mental health conditions. So they're so severe that you're needing assistance.
Mhm.
We're a small crew
Right.
that do this work. So that's a specialization.
Hmm.
Even within that, it is a much further specialization to then be someone who specializes within, say, forensic work or working with people within prisons
Right.
or, a forensic psychiatric hospital kind of thing. And so there's not enough people, there's not enough money. And so that's one of the things with honestly, I think that you kind of get that sense with Gotham because Arkham Asylum a lot of times doesn't seem like the most up to date place.
Yeah. No one wants to work
Seem
there.
no one wants to work there. They don't have the training that they need. It's pretty clear in some of the interactions and whatnot.
Oh yeah.
it's a tricky place, and Blackgate, I'm sure, is no better.
But
So yeah, there's just not the money and resources, and I mean, I definitely hope that we don't have any Dr. Hugo Stranges around in the United
well,
States.
yeah,
But also, if you're someone who wants fame and fortune, if you go into one of these fields, you're going to want to be the person on top. So,
yeah,
not everyone that's in leadership position is there because of the goodness in their heart. Hopefully, most of them are.
exactly.
But yeah, there might be some Doctor Stranges out there, and you hope that the system catches them and weeds them out a lot better than Gotham does. Um, on the flip side, I mean, very recently, a major hospital chain, psychiatric hospital chain, has been outed. I think it was in Georgia, for essentially extending people's stays as long as they could to get insurance payouts. So
Sheesh.
it happens. And we don't always believe the people it's happening to because they have something like psychosis that can affect their judgment, their ability to
God, that's
perceive
horrible.
things. Yeah.
That's
So
really
the things that
horrible.
happen in Arkham, I try and be very, very aware that our world is not a perfect place because you never know. These things can happen in our world too.
Hmm.
But once again, you really hope that the Doctor Stranges get weeded out.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, it's 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 one of those things where I think that with Arkham in particular, the criminals that are locked up in Arkham in the bat in the DC universe are like, I feel like they would do more damage if they were at Blackgate. Like there is a
It is an intriguing difference that
yeah.
you do. Yeah. And so, from what Dr. Sharippa was talking about last week, it's the opposite that you tend to see in the real world, where
Hmm.
the folks that have the mental health conditions that are really affecting their ability, they get taken advantage of. So he talked about how um, they fall prey to these other people. And so if you have
Hmm.
them in the prison system, things are going to look really bad. But yeah, in Gotham, things are a little different where people have all these powers and other things. And I think you're right, where I was actually reading up on Arkham, and something was pointing out that it's also a place at times that is for environmental adjustments based on medical conditions like Mr. Freeze.
Hmm. Poison
So
Ivy, right?
So yeah, absolutely. That's one of the unique
Clayface.
things about Arkham, where it's kind of a full-fledged facility to help with the like enhanced, super enhanced
At,
criminals, shall we say.
yeah, at some point we're gonna have to talk about like Arkham Asylum as it's depicted in the video game because it's so elaborate the way that they do things, and it's like that would never be a thing. Like I always think about Croc, like in Arkham Asylum, they literally keep Croc in the sewers. Like he swims around in the waters and they feed him raw meat and like it's just like this is not this is not good.
So yeah, that's an interesting thing. And you know that I want to play the video games. I need to get into video games. Someone needs to help me do it because I
Even
want to
if
play
it's
games like that. But
here's the thing. Even if it's just those. And I think you
yeah.
would like it because I think you would love being Batman and like doing the detective work, doing the beating up, doing the studying, like and honestly,
uh,
Arkham itself in those games are a character. Like it is
mm,
that like that first this especially the first game because the first game takes place 100% inside of Arkham Arkham Asylum. It takes place on the island and like you're cut off from everything and
mm.
spoiler, the slight spoiler, and here's something that's really funny. Batman, as a just in case scenario, built a second Batcave underneath Arkham Asylum.
Of course he did. Of course he did. I feel like that's not super smart though, because wouldn't it be easier for them to get to? Anyway, whatever.
It's
Uh,
they can't.
so
He makes
so
sure they can't, but
Killer.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's a really good point about Killer Croc. Depending on the context, that could actually be a good thing you're doing or a bad thing you're doing, or both,
Hmm.
because life's not that simple. But so in in one respect, if he is fully embracing this identity, or if he has biological genetic differences about himself and you're trying to adapt his space so that it works for him and so that he's able to survive and function and be able to do other work because you're meeting him where he's at, that's one thing.
Right.
Versus, you and I, in our episode about Killer Croc, we've talked about how in other ways, it could be perpetuating this image that was forced upon him based on a skin condition, etc.
Right.
And then you're essentially treating him like an animal. And
Hmm.
so here's another thing where you could relate it back to real life, where one of the big pushes when it came to the recovery movement, also when it comes to movements related to disability, um, is with institutionalization. You essentially degrade a person's ability to function. So there are things that can affect our ability to function purely based on limitations within our body or our mind or whatever.
Hmm.
However, a lot of things related to disability have to do with your environment. So, for example, if you use a wheelchair, but everywhere around you has stairs, but if you lived in a place that just had wide openings and no stairs, you'd have no problem.
Right.
So there's a lot that we've grown to understand a little bit better when it comes to that. But yeah, if you treat Killer Croc in this way and you essentially degrade his ability to interact as a human, then you have a Killer Croc instead
Right.
of Waylon
This is just
Jones.
someone you're not trying to help them. You're just keeping them away.
Exactly. But let's say Waylon Jones has been treated this way forever, and so you've got to start with him maybe being in the sewer some, eating some raw meat because that's all he knows at this point, and
Hmm.
he would not be able to handle you just treating him like Joe Schmo
Like
across the
cold
street, right?
turkey. Like, hey, let's go sit down at a
Exactly.
Wendy's. Right.
But you can help, and this is rehabilitation, you can help someone build back up those skills and build back up to those things. So when it comes to, say, the recovery movement and deinstitutionalization, a lot of people then ended up with no resources. Well, you need to help people be able to build back up what we degraded when a person wasn't able to do all these things for themselves. They weren't allowed, they weren't able to make choices for themselves. So the ability to make choices for yourself, it, you lost touch with how to do that,
Mhm.
right? So same potentially sort of thing here with the Arkham Asylum game and Killer Croc,
Yeah.
Waylon Jones.
Yeah. And I don't know. It's one of those things where it's weird because it's like in the real world, I'm appalled by it. In comic
Eh,
books and in Gotham specifically, it, it it has a life of its own, and I just love this idea that like his whole rogues gallery, and not only his rogues gallery, but there are times where you see some of Flash's villains show up
mm.
at Arkham. Lex Luthor has been there
Oh, I don't think I
before.
knew that.
Yeah, he's been there for treatment before. I think
Yeah,
yeah, it was yeah.
unless he's like a really different guy, that's one that shouldn't have ended up
Well,
there.
I want to say that one something actually happened to him, like that
Okay.
that put him
Okay.
there. I can't remember what it was, but
Interesting. I'll have to find that storyline.
um yeah, and so it's just it's a really cool concept of like seeing all of these characters because they also always interact with each other. I mean, even in Matt Reeves' Batman, you had whoever his Joker was
Yep.
speaking with the Riddler, who was right next door and in talking distance, which is not something that in the real world would ever happen. Because the thing about Arkham is if Hugo Strange or Harley is at the center of it, that's the only time it seems like it is a true that is the only time they even it seems like, reference the fact that it is a medical facility.
And Harley Quinn, I mean, as Harleen Quinzel, I mean, there are actual storylines where she's going and trying to
Yeah,
do treatment or some sort of research to learn more
yeah,
about the people there. And yeah,
yeah. Majority of the time, though, it's depicted as ADX Florence, the maximum of maximum security prisons where you can make sure that no one escapes. And it's called Arkham Asylum, but you don't really see much of that.
exactly.
You just
Yeah.
see a whole lot of prison guards armed to the T, uh, and
And so here's the thing is
calling
that,
all the members crazy to their face, like you're crazy, and da-da-da.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
they prod them, and
So
I'm like, yep,
not
keep.
trained well, not the
Nope.
right people, and
They're
not
from
doing
Blackgate.
treatment.
At
Yeah.
one point, they could not find people to work at Arkham, so they got Blackgate inmates to be guards.
Okay. So that's an example of something that would not happen in the real world. If it gets to that point, I might just have to quit. Things are
I'm
just real
not
bad
shocked
then.
by anything
Um,
anymore.
so, I mean, not having the extent of training that you need can unfortunately be true. I mean, it's true for cops. I mean, police officers all the time are the ones who uh, are the ones called into a mental health crisis, for example. Um, and there's just not enough resources when it comes
Mhm,
to making sure that people have training, and it's tough work, and it takes a special kind of person to be able to do it. And I actually, I respect so much the people that I know who do this work, and there's legitimate treatment that people are doing.
mhm.
You can help people be able to get to the point where they're competent to stand trial, for example, where they might be so disoriented because of the mental health condition. I'm assuming, yeah, they have probably have a similar process for medical conditions when that happens too. But helping people be competent to stand trial, helping people, and by the way, like I was mentioning before, treatment within prisons as well. But it is limited, and the resources aren't what ideally they would be. And yeah, it's. I definitely agree with you that Arkham Asylum. There are definitely there are definitely sources where it's like, okay, there's legitimate treatment happening. And then there are the times where it's like, this seems just like a prison for superpowered people.
Yeah,
And then it's like, that's just Blackgate Plus.
yeah,
That's not y- to me personally, if it's truly Arkham Asylum, they're at least trying to do treatment stuff. They might be flubbing it all over the place. There might be some hinky stuff going on with Doctor Strange, but yeah, if it's like that prison aspect, like
yeah,
Blackgate, that's really just Blackgate for superpowered people.
yeah. And what's interesting too is a lot of the times you in the stories you see Bruce Wayne finances Arkham to give them
Mm,
specialized facilities
yep.
for certain inmates. Like, hey, I know that there's going to be quite the electric bill for keeping Mister Freeze's cell lower temp than everybody else's. Here you go. I know it's going to take a special kind of cell with no outlets anywhere whatsoever to hold Clayface, right? And so, like so many times, Wayne Enterprises has stepped in and like sponsored
Yeah.
or donated to Arkham to
Yeah.
keep these inmates in, which also, but which isn't healthy because, like I said, they always show that aspect. Like, look, Wayne Enterprises built this cage, but they're not showing, hey, Wayne Enterprises pays these doctors to help them. They
True.
do sometimes,
There
especially
are a
with like
few of
Kirk
them that,
Langstrom, who's like
yeah.
more of a tragic. They
Yep.
his is outwardly more tragic than the other ones. So many of the villains are tragic cases, but his is like, I was just a doctor trying to cure deafness, and then I turned myself into a bat and killed people. And it's when you say it like that, it's like there were so
And it's
many times that could have
Gotham.
been prevented. Right. Like, dude,
It's
go
Gotham. That's
leave this
probably
leave the city limits to do your experiments because like Gotham is just not the place to try
if
and like
anything, in Gotham, it's like, Another naive doctor thinking that they're not gonna turn into some.
Right, right. Like if I hit the lottery in Gotham, I would think it was a setup. I was like,
Nope, not taking
it
that
would have
money.
to be a huge amount of money for me to show up and be like, I've got the winning ticket. Like, no, you could not. No. Mm-mm. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. For me to out myself as a multimillionaire in Gotham, like, no. This is a setup, and I'm about to get eaten by a giant Venus flytrap. This is going to be horrible.
Yeah. But yeah, Arkham Asylum, uh it it was built to be something good in a decent amount of the storylines. It struggles. Just like in the real world, we struggle with things. Every now and then they get it right. Like, there are a few storylines where, like, because ventriloquist, when
Yeah.
they helped him, I think it was the animated series
Hmm.
episode where they helped him rehabilitate. There's been a Two Face one where they help him. Like, there are those
Yeah.
snippets, and they're usually just little tiny pockets within a story. But I actually really love those little
Yeah. The ones where,
storylines.
because the thing is, it's just like any other system. When you remove the corrupt people at the top,
Mm.
you're able to actually help people, and it's able to run the way that it was supposed to or
As long
meant
as
to.
Bruce Wayne can foot the bill, at
Yeah.
least here in the United States.
Oh yeah. All we need is one good billionaire. The United States has plenty of
Thanks for nerding out with us. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Emilia Brown.
them. And I'm educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JVS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. And don't forget our Patreon page at patreon.com/battherapy. See you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.